Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Today I want to go over a bit about this week's model, Fabius Bile, his lore, history, who he is, that sort of thing. I may or may not do these additional videos on the regular, but you can always let me know what you think in the comments. You know, like the grand three of you who are ever going to see this video. So, who is this stylish man? What are his motivations, and where is he now, apart from sitting on my little curio shelf? Well, some spoiler warnings. This video will contain some spoilers from the books Primogenitor, Clonelord, Fulgrim, and whatnot. So, Fabius Bile, Chief Apothecary, a Lord Commander of the Emperor's Children, Clonelord, Primogenitor, and perhaps one of the ballsiest individuals in the 40k setting. Yes, I would say that even more so than, say, the standard Imperial Guardsman, whose brass balls are standard issue along with the lasgun and flak jacket. Where the soldiers of the Imperium have vast armies and industry to rely on against the horrors that the galaxy throws at them, and the forces of chaos embrace said horrors, Bile stands alone against them all, armed with his flesh cloak, his pimping staff Torment, and his freakishly sharp intellect. Fabius is one of the most level-headed of the traitor space marines still existing in the galaxy. He is not aligned with any chaos god, nor really anyone, even his own legion. He is generally very calm and collected, acting very much like a stereotypical Oxford professor at pretty much at all times, quickly seizing the opportunity to impart knowledge to anyone who will listen. Part of this is due to his training and makeup of being a space marine, but also his chirurgeon, which will pump chemicals into his bloodstream to ensure a clear mind, or to calm his anger when rage is not appropriate for the moment. He is always analyzing the situation on how to come out ahead, and more importantly, what samples to harvest to further along whatever goal he's working on at the moment. He dislikes combat in general, which is kind of unusual for a space marine, and while he is more capable than most space marines, he prefers to let others to do the fighting for him. Speaking of said intellect, he is one of the smartest individuals, perhaps the smartest human alive, in the 40k galaxy. In a discipline considered arcane and taboo by humanity, not only has Bile been able to successfully create new clones of himself and transfer his consciousness into said clones, but he has also created not one, not two, but 3 clones of actual Primarchs. That is what has earned him his title, Clonelord. I would even say that Bile is more capable than Belisarius Cawl of Mars, his Imperium counterpart, or at least his closest equivalent, if he had an army that he could trust to watch his back. Going into his history, starting at the beginning, Fabius is a child of noble birth from Terra. That's right, even with the embers of old night still fading, from the start, baby Fab was born with a silver spoon in his mouth. Back then, when the legions were first being formed, the 3rd Legion, which wasn't called the Emperor's Children yet, recruited exclusively from the nobility. We don't know much of his childhood, other than that he liked to tinker with things. Once inducted into the Legion, he became an apothecary and developed an early version of the chirurgeon, that big mechanical spindly device on his back. He was tasked with curing a disease called the Blight that decimated the Legion, a cure he never found and still fights personally to this day. Between the Blight and war taking its toll, there were only 200 of the 3rd Legion left alive when the Emperor found Fulgrim and reunited him with his sons. Fabius was the sole apothecary in that group. This puts him on par with Karn and Araman as some of the oldest living space marines in the galaxy. Now, the Primarch Fulgrim, he was, though I should say is, a smart man. He saw early on that Fabius was extremely capable, if awkward and reserved. And I say awkwardness as a severe understatement. Even here, back when his legion was young and reaching its zenith under the Emperor, the chief apothecary was not like most Astartes. He was a capable warrior, but he didn't focus on these skills. He didn't care about the chain of command, He isolated himself from his legion and was generally pretty unkempt in appearance. All of this was directly contrary to how the Emperor's children behaved back then in their quest towards perfection. Still, he was the oldest and by far the most skilled apothecary in the Legion, and he provided results, and Fulgrim respected that more than anything else, despite having to will himself not to strike Fabius due to his insolence at times. Now, nobody goes from a loyal apothecary in a rigid military structure to a heretical mad scientist hated the galaxy over in one night. As they say, small steps corrupt. Fabius's corruption started with his tinkering with the gene seed that helped make Astartes, well, Astartes. Even in what was then an officially atheistic society, the idea of somebody tampering with the Emperor's template to make a space marine was considered taboo on the grounds that no one can improve the Emperor's work. However, Fulgrim allowed this with some oversight within the Legion in his quest for perfection. What resulted from this was the first noise marines, individuals who could amplify their voice to lethal levels, killing opponents with sound alone. Lord Commander Eidolon was the first one to receive this type of enhancement. And eventually, Fulgrim turned traitor and devoted himself to the Chaos God Slaanesh. He took those loyal with him, including Fabius. Any pretense of restrictions or oversight went by the wayside, as you do not worship the god of excess to, in turn, limit yourself. Kind of counterproductive. Further tinkering continued, and he was even able to resurrect the aforementioned Eidolon by reattaching his head. I'm only aware of a certain orc being able to pull off that kind of feat. More noise marines were created, and he was elevated to the position of Lord Commander, making him one of the principal leaders in the Legion's military hierarchy. At least when he pretended to have an hierarchy while it descended into hedonistic madness. During this time, he was able to create a clone of Ferrus Manus, who was slain by Fulgrim. However, this was more of a toy for Fulgrim, who would then try to tempt Ferrus to join Chaos. The clone would refuse, and Fulgrim would kill him and have Bile make another. Our boy Fabius, though, he didn't share in the descent into madness that Chaos typically brings, at least not to the same extent. As the Legion further devoted itself to Slaanesh, he ended up abandoning them during the Siege of Terra, making his way through the galaxy and eventually back to the Eye of Terror. From here, he set up a base on a world called Urim and formed the Consortium, where he and other like-minded apothecaries, regardless of their Legion affiliation, can romp and play to their own heart's delight. Also, they get to create new horrors through their own pet projects, but that's more of a side project. Fabius used to have a goal of revitalizing the old legions. It's still something he hopes to do one day, but it's no longer his most paramount focus. He saw the traitor Primarch's descent as slaves to Chaos as more or less tragic and unnecessary, and while not able to reverse this spiral, figured he could just make clones of the originals, corruption-free. His most well-known attempt was a clone of the War Master Horus, which Abaddon destroyed shortly after maturation, along with most of Bile's lab. In addition, he even created a clone of Fulgrim, but keep that in the back of your head and we'll get back to that in a moment. Since the destruction of the Horus clone, Fabius has a new goal in mind, what he has been chasing to this very day. He feels that a new breed of humanity needs to surpass the decaying Imperium and let the whole institution burn down and replace it with his children, his new men. These men, and women I might add, are stronger than normal humans, but they're still not as powerful as a space marine. They are pack hunters, however, trained to kill Astartes and consume their gene seed, and unlike tools produced by the Emperor, the new men can breed on their own. They all see Bile as their benevolent father figure, and to a degree, he actually is. They refer to the chief apothecary as primogenitor, hence the other title. Bile, in turn, continues to guide their process, shepherding and improving them until they are ready to face the galaxy without him. So here you have a man who is the closest to perfecting cloning than any other human being, developed a new species of human beings, and perhaps one of the best geneticists next to the God Emperor himself. So why is he such a small player compared to the likes of Abaddon or the other Chaos Champions? Why? The same problem all the Emperor's children have. Pure, unbridled arrogance. And no ethical restrictions whatsoever. Fabius's quest to perfect his new men is such that he will go to any lengths to secure what he feels is good genetic samples to help him in his research. To this end, anything and everything is game. He will betray, or has betrayed, nearly every fellow traitor in the Eye of Terror. He's like a twisted genie who will always deliver on whatever he promised, but in such a way that the recipient will regret it. He has even gone undercover, getting samples from the Imperium, even going so far as getting the blood from the Primarch Sanguinius from the Blood Angels via trickery. His own Legion hates him, his Primarch has a bounty on his head, and even the Consortium are less like allies and more like tools that can be used, preserved if possible, but discarded if needed. Couple this behavior with how he treats and views everyone around him. His creations are children to him, and always will be. They are always not ready yet, and need to be sheltered. His vision is always the right one, regardless of what anyone else has to say, or the proof of something better is sitting right in front of him. That clone of Fulgrim I mentioned earlier, he traded that Fulgrim clone to a Necron prone to keeping esoteric collections, purely because the clone wouldn't adhere to the path that Bile envisioned. And to be fair, Bile never told his vision to the clone. The clone had just won him back his own ship and instantly cowed his enemies with his mere presence. But because this wasn't part of the plan, off to being part of a human diorama he went. Even with the Chaos Gods, despite living on their doorstep, witnessing the effects of the gods, and even talking to literal demons, he's still clinging to the imperial truth that these creatures are nothing more than celestial tumors, and nothing more than a figment of people's collective imagination. He even has the gall to say this to a greater demon of Slaanesh, to its face, who itself is a part of said god. And lastly, Fabius is a sick and dying old man. He is the last of the Emperor's children that still has the blight. Never having been conquered, this disease will eventually kill whatever the current clone Bile is using, given enough time. A new clone is then used to continue onwards, but this one too will eventually reach a point where it will die from the blight, and it will do it faster than the previous one. The Chief Apothecary has more or less accepted this, and is basically trying to hold himself together until his new men are ready to exist without his stewardship. If that point ever arises, then, in his own words, he can finally rest. Well, speaking of resting, I think we will call this video here then. Well, that's Fabius Bile in a nutshell. I hope you enjoyed this little break from painting tutorials. If you liked this video, give it a thumbs up down below. Until next video.